Hello everyone, today we are taking a look at the Jumper T20. This is a radio that has been kind of seen around Facebook and various other places. There's probably some videos on it already. I've had this for about 10 days, maybe close to 2 weeks. I'm not certain about that. But the first thing out of the box, it's a looker. It's a pretty sharp looking radio. This hopefully comes through kind of true. This isn't black. This is kind of I would call it a midnight blue. It does have black areas on it as well, and then we have the gimbals up front. The gimbal adjustments that you see up front, those are strictly for travel purposes. Those do not just spring tension. We'll get into the spring tension adjustments here after a bit, but this is 1 watt. One of the questions that comes up quite often when it comes to receivers, transmitters, is range testing. If you find range testing, it's probably going to be difficult to find because, quite honestly, range testing is one of those things that draws the attention of local authorities, and then they get in contact with whoever created it, and then they tell them to take it down, or they take it down so that they don't get in further trouble. As far as range testing, when they were available, Wesley Vardy, he did a lot of express layers range testing, and I think he was using like 25 milliwatt, maybe 100 milliwatt. I can't really remember, but he had something less than a watt, and he had flown a wing out 33 kilometers, and I don't think it fail-safed. He just decided to bring it back for the sakes of being able to get the wing back rather than it just running out of battery. So if you're wondering about 1 watt and how far it could go, huge variables. Environmental variables are big time in FPV when it comes to our goggles and our control link. But Express LRS is doing very, very well. It's competing at the top end as far as range. Of course, you can change packet rates and various settings to make it go even as far as you want it to or further. But the first thing I want to do is get down to the desk and take it apart. So here it is disassembled. I just wanted to give you a quick look. You can pause the frame, maybe zoom in if you need to, if you wanted to take a specific look. I'm not going to go over each and every little bit of detail. Some of it is I don't have experience with small chip engineering and PCB design. I don't have any experience in that, so that's something, if you have that experience, you need to kind of dive in for your own. The main thing I wanted to go over was about the front side. This is, of course, the back side of the case, but getting it apart. Okay, so to get it apart, you got 2 screws that are underneath the wraps. These rubber grips, I should say, they don't have really a spot to put them, to pull them out, so you're going to have to use a spudger if you have one of those, or a wide flat screwdriver in order to pry these out. They're not terrible. It's just not something that we can do with our fingers, so that's a little bit of a barrier to getting to these, and you will have to get to the back if you want to tighten or loosen the spring tension. But we'll cover that here in just a minute. So we've got 2 on each side, so that's 4. Got 2 across the bottom that go through the battery tray. These 2 down here. So that's 6. And then we've got 2 right up here. So that's 7 and 8. And then there's 2 more because they go through the antenna slot there at the top. So we've got 10 screws. We also need to loosen up the nuts on the top of each one of these switches. And something else, I'm not... Well, take a look at this. So if you look at... I'll take this one out. If you look at this, it looks like this should brace up against the top little bits here. But when you put the switch in, it's not designed to do that. Or we're off. Look at this is about as good as it's going to get for me. And if you look closely at that, I'm trying to hold it in place because it is kind of recessed a little bit. So I'm trying to hold it in place. It's actually kind of wedging these switches in the corners against the switch next to it. Instead of against the outside of the frame or of the case, and then you would screw it down. So if you tighten or loosen these, be careful because you could push these around a little bit and you never know, do any damage. Obviously, that exists on both sides. This one's seated a little bit more naturally. It's just kind of sitting there. This top nut is still loose, and you can see how it's wedged against the next one. So I was a little surprised to see that. I think our speaker is underneath here. It is enclosed, but we'll take a listen to that here as we get deeper into this review. This is obviously our throttle side, so if you wanted to decrease the tension on that, which these gimbals are already pretty loose, they're not as loose as I would like them, but I also found that the springs just are, not to put it in negatively, the springs are weak. So if you want to loosen these much or tighten these much, you're not going to get much change. I took these screws, 1, 2, all the way down to the bottom and all the way up to the top, and I could barely tell a difference in the spring tension. And I was actually watching the springs as I screwed them in and unscrewed them just to make sure, to verify I was doing the right thing, and it just didn't have much of a feel change to it. So if you want stronger or more rigid gimbals, or you want looser gimbals, there's not going to be much of a variance you're going to be able to get after you get into the back of this case. Although I will say, by default, these are looser than what I typically feel stock out of the box when it comes to gimbals. So that's a good thing. There was one other thing I wanted to note, not just that, but I guess I should call out, not only do you have to take out all the screws, but you see all the connections. So 1, 2, 3, we got another one down there, 4, 5, and then the antenna, 6, because the antenna is threaded through this hole, comes up behind this PCB, and then connects to our Express LRS receiver right there. So that's another connection, another thing you have to do. If you have boot problems, a little tip about these radios: if you have boot problems, your screen comes on and it stays on, but it doesn't show you any of the text, or it doesn't show you the boot logo or anything like that. Generally, one of the first things I suggest to people is to take this battery out, take your overall radio battery out, take the case apart, the 2 shells, and take this battery out. It's just a little coin cell. It's printed right on there, the type of cell that it is. If you think it's dead, you could go get a replacement, but taking it out for 20-30 seconds. I also like to press the power button, maybe press it and hold it in, press it. You know, you got it apart, you might as well try it, and then put the battery back in and see if it'll boot up after that. It's a quick, free thing you could try before you start to do more exotic things. The only thing I wanted to point out about the back side of the shell is these rollers. I think you call these rollers. I flew one plane like 15 years ago, and it was a diamond-shaped plane. I can't remember what you call this. But the detent on it, I don't know if my camera's going to pick this up very well, but when I roll it right there, I can feel the detent where it's kind of the center point. So if I move this back around, hopefully you can see it right there. It's just curious to me because I've never noticed this before on any other component for a detent. That's all it is. It's just that little change in how they manufacture this wheel. Just that little change. And you can feel it. It's not terrible heavy, but it's there. This part isn't catching. I can actually see that as I roll it around. There's nothing. It's actually right down there. Even you could probably see it where I've got the detent or the centering in place. So that's essentially the case in a nutshell. Of course, you got a good look at both the front and the back sides here. It takes quite a bit to take it apart. Now I gotta hope I can put it back together. Okay, so the first thing is we do have a foldable antenna, and it does turn, and we have all sorts of switches. Let's start way back here. We have these dials, and these dials do have a center detent. These little buttons over here are kind of curious. Hopefully I can hold this right. You don't press them on this side. You only press them on this corner. They're kind of single position momentary switches. We also have switches that go this way. I think these are just 2-position switches. Then we have switches up here. These are our 3-position switches. And then we also have some additional turn dials down here, and we have these sliders. And then the rest of these, well, not these buttons, but then we have our buttons to drive our EdgeTX menu down here. And then you can actually also assign these to some sort of aux switch if you want to. Of course, by default, the model that it's using does not have that set up. Let's turn it on.
Welcome to EdgeTX. Switch warning.
Okay, so I do prefer the blue that the power button uses, but you know, I have a bias for blue. But we have our little channel monitor. I bring that up by default. You can see there it moves in the center. So you can use those here, and then we move these, and it moves those as well in the center. Hopefully you're seeing that. And then we have our gimbal position sticks. These are not Hall center gimbals. They use potentiometers, I think is what they're called, if I'm saying that correctly. One of the things I did if you're looking at the sticks, I did loosen them. I didn't get them as loose as I'd like, but if you notice that this stick is kind of traveling down on its own, I did loosen those out of the box. I like very loose, very sloppy. I'm not going to go into too much about the gimbal adjustments. You can see these screws. Those are for travel adjustments. They have little pieces that can come in and out. Jumper has got a video on that. It's kind of an animated video, but I'll link that down in the video description below. Our trim buttons are right up here, and so if you press these,
Trim center.
what's interesting about these, I'm trying to
Trim center.
see, so they go all directions, but they only register
Trim center.
when you go up and down for that particular one. And then let's see, yeah,
Trim center.
that's the trim center, but it didn't show it center.
Trim center.
Maybe a delay in that. But see, if I press it up, now we're getting this one over here. Maybe you wing folks know why you would have so many trims. But in FPV quads, we typically don't use those. The speaker, as you saw it, I think it's located on this side, is it, or is it this side? Well, these are the venting and the speakers. Also around here on the back, I'm going to turn this off. Before I go back, this does not hang level. I don't know how well it's going to come through, but yeah, if you use a lanyard and you hang it from a neck, it does hang bottom heavy. Of course, I have a goggle battery in here right now. Oh, there we go, got it out. As you can see there, goggle battery that I've been using for radios for the most part for a while now. It does come with a tray that you can put in 18650s. The plug-in is right over here. This is a metal heatsink that you have to help dissipate heat for your Express LRS if you're running it hot. Of course, Express LRS does offer dynamics power range, so it can zoom it up and zoom it down at your heart's desire. Underneath this panel, we do have more USB, or is it a USB? No, there's only one USB on this one. Okay, I finally got it. So this is where you would plug in some of these accessories. Let me get it out. So with a plate like this, you could put it on the back and you would plug it in through here. And then you have another antenna right down here. This is the 4-in-1. So if you got the Express LRS and then you wanted to get a 4-in-1 to control FrSky or others, you could plug that in right here, and then you screw it down. It comes with some screws, and it just goes right down onto that bottom plate. All metal, as you can probably hear, both metal. We have a port down there, or an XT30 port. We can also plug in external power. Up on top, we've got our USB port right there, so that is where you plug in to charge, as well as to do your FPV in the simulator. And then we've got a trainer port right here. The antenna does turn, if I didn't show you that already. It does turn vertical, just like so. Yeah, I got a little scuff on there. Yeah, I've had it apart. These seem to be these ports that you would probably use for mounting something else. Maybe you have a screen that you're going to mount to the radio. These little rubber grommets just pull right out. The grips back here are rubberized. We've got the Jumper logo on the back as well. Jumper does have some new receivers out, like this Ion RX Nano, which is this little guy here. Pretty small little receiver. Interested in that, but as far as weight goes, it's not going to be the lowest weight. So you'd want to have, I'd say, at least a 2-inch prop, if not bigger, when using this particular receiver. So let's bring in a few other radios to get a feel for the size of this. And I know I have a little bit of a camera angle, but I think this will do us. It's not physically that much bigger than the Jumper here. Let me zoom out. So side by side with the Jumper, it's not that much bigger than the Jumper, and the Jumper is a small radio. Now, of course, it's thicker than the Jumper with those handhelds, but it's not that much bigger than the Jumper, oddly enough. So if size matters to you, not big. And this reminds me, because of its wide set, a lot of the QX7, but it's not nearly as big as the QX7 either. And depending upon how you view the Zorro, you could probably say that the T20 is smaller than the Zorro because of the giant screen on the Zorro. Of course, battery life on the Jumper is going to vary depending upon how you power it, with whether you use a LiPo or 18650s and what capacity those 18650s are, excuse me. But obviously, it's in some ways smaller than the Zorro, and in other ways maybe not so much. And another small radio that I happen to have, the Tango 2 over here on the right from TBS. It's bigger than the Tango 2. Of course, they both have foldable antennas. I will say the assembly for the T20 on the foldable antenna, it feels more hardy, and it's very likely to live up to more abuse, but who knows how much more abuse. But another size comparison, because I think these are the type of radios you would compare this size against. Of course, if you wanted to be ridiculous, we could compare it to a traditional TX16S. The TX16S is so big, if I tilt it upright, it gets out of frame. So got it angled here. These are big radios. Some people prefer those. They also have touch screens in them. I don't know how much that gets used. I always thought that was just a marketing sell, not a feature sell or a functional sell. But yeah, ridiculous comparison. TX16 is huge compared to the T20. So for me, when I compare the gimbals, it's really hard for me to compare the gimbals. I'm used to using the CNC all aluminum, or all metal, excuse me, I don't know if that's aluminum or not, all metal, high precision, $100 gimbals on the Radiomaster Zorro that I've been using for a long time. But one of the things I look for is a heavy detent, and here you could probably hear it, that detent over here on the pitch roll stick. And if I do it on those AG01 mini gimbals, you can hear it a little bit because the spring actions rock between the two springs, but it's there's not much there as far as a detent on these gimbals. Much more of a detent or centering position on these gimbals. As far as precision and their smoothness, for me, they didn't cause me any sort of flight problems. I think form factor matters a lot more for me when I'm doing flight and I'm doing comparison of gimbals. Comparing one gimbal to another, some people are better at that than I am. I don't think I have a terrible sensitivity. Yes, I do pinch style, and I did fly this with this style of I didn't try to thumb. You could thumb, I guess. I haven't thumbed in so long, I wouldn't be a good judge of that either. But for me, this is a little bit wide, a little bit bigger than I would want to use, but that doesn't mean it's not a good radio for you to use. It's a very sharp radio, and it has all sorts of different buttons and switches and features that you could use into your model in order to accomplish what you needed to for various model types that you might be out there flying. The roller over here does feel like it's metal, and it is very clicky. These buttons, they have a little bit of a texture to them, but I think it's mainly just plastic, and of course they light up when they're pressed. I'm not sure why they have the little plus sign. That might be for mounting on the back end, and we just see that because it's clear and they have the lights on them. So that's something that would take maybe you could program or set up different color LEDs if you're into the DIY stuff and you wanted to get into the inside and put in some different color LEDs for each one. Maybe you can do that. Maybe they're programmable. I didn't notice any change in color when I was tinkering with it, though. I think my overall opinion of the radio is it's a good radio. I think you need to be aware of the gimbals and the type that they are. They're not Hall sensor gimbals. I think we've kind of come to expect that. To me, that doesn't necessarily mean the gimbals they're using are worse, because again, when I was flying it, when I was using it on the simulator, I didn't notice any sort of strangeness or less precision that I would expect. Flying quads I'm very, very familiar with. I think if you don't want to get inside of your radio, this is another thing where that whole middle section of my video about how you have to take out all these different screws, and it's pretty tedious to get in and out to separate the shells to get inside. If that's not a big deal to you, if the spring tension and being able to adjust that very much isn't a big deal to you, but 1 watt of Express LRS is a big deal to you, and having a form factor that is pretty sexy, as well as not a giant radio and also not a small radio that does have full-size gimbals with all these different switches, dials, and whatnot on it. This fits into the market in kind of that niche where you're wanting certain things and you don't want a big giant radio and you're looking at a particular price point. Speaking of price, when I last looked this up, depending upon which version you get, you can pay for around $100 all and up to about $130 for this particular radio. Again, it varies depending upon whether you go with FR Sky or you choose one of the alternates. Also, it does come with, but I didn't mention it much, but I should have. It comes with a pretty nice manual, but oddly enough, it doesn't cover very specific things. It talks more about the setup of your model file, things like that. It doesn't really cover the gimbals and the adjustments. That was something that I had to look up and I got from the Jumper YouTube channel so I could look into how to adjust the gimbals. Again, I'll link that down below. And they also include a lanyard with it. I already mentioned it, but it does come with a battery tray for 18650 batteries. So those are the things that you get with the T20 as well as this radio. And if you get this particular one, you get a foldable antenna that comes right down, and you get a sexy looker of an antenna, or radio that you can enjoy looking at. And again, when you hang it, it doesn't hang flat, at least with the batteries that I have in there, which are typical goggle batteries. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching.